Welcome to the Bulwark podcast and happy Tuesday. And because we want to keep it a happy Tuesday, I'm not going to even mention what the World Bank is predicting for the world economy because that would just be slightly depressing. We need some more upbeat news, which of course is why we invited Jonathan Allen, senior national politics reporter for NBC News, back on the podcast. So happy Tuesday, Jonathan.
Well, I am so happy it's Tuesday, and from the economic projections, you can do the acronym for "So happy it's Tuesday" as compared to "Thank God it's Friday," and
Well, exactly. So,
they sort of match up.
so right before we started the podcast, I confessed to you that I am still locked in my skeptical, cynical mode about negotiations about gun control. There have been a lot of reports, though, that would suggest that members of the Senate are saying, "Look, we're working on something. We're going for a consensus bill, not something that will pass with just 60 votes, but." A piece of legislation that would actually be supported by a majority of the Republican caucus. And John Cornyn is, talking about the possibility of getting something done. And Chris Murphy, who is one of the rare grown-ups in the room, seems to be willing to compromise on lots of things. It's not going to be comprehensive. But I don't know, see, Jonathan, am I just a prisoner of all of my past broken expectations, or and I've asked this several times on the podcast, and I just want to get people different perspectives. Will they get anything done? I really desperately want to be wrong. Am I wrong to be
I
skeptical?
mean, there's like sort of an index, I guess, of like the more likely they are to get something done, the less it is that they're doing.
Right.
And the
Well,
more
that's
that they're
good. That's
doing,
good.
the less
Yeah.
likely it is to get done. So, I mean, we've watched this movie so many times in Congress, and
I know.
whether it was Sandy Hook or Marjorie Stoneman Douglas or Gabby Giffords getting shot in the head during a multiple killing shooting in Arizona, or Steve Scalise and other Republican congressmen being shot on a ball field outside Washington, they don't do anything. And the biggest reason that they don't do anything is because their constituents don't want them to. And let me specify that's on the Republican side. On the Democratic side, most of their constituents want them to do a lot more in terms of regulating guns. I think there's this sort of trope that the Republican Party is owned by the NRA, but of course the NRA has been influential in the past, and I think it's less influential than it is now, than it was then. But like the reason that it's influential is because there are a whole lot of people who vote on the gun issue, and they vote in Republican primaries, and they vote in general elections, and um, this is the This is the reason you see so many former Republican congressmen talking about how we need gun control now, who did not say that when they were in office.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, even though we have polls showing, the vast majority of Americans supporting incremental change on gun safety or gun responsibility, the fact is that the reality of politics is determined by a very vocal minority that votes in Republican primaries. So even if it's only 40% of Republicans that are hair on fire against any gun control measure, that's enough to shut down any Republican elected official. I mean, that's the way it works, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a passion issue,
Yeah.
and it's one that's completely interesting. I mean, I travel the country and I talk to voters everywhere. I was in Wyoming a couple weeks ago for a Trump rally and to write about the Liz Cheney Harriet Hageman contest, and I was talking to a Republican couple in Cheyenne, and they were saying, the first thing that they said when I asked them about guns is we need to address the root cause, and the root cause is mental illness. And I thought,
Right.
here I'm going to get sort of Republican talking points from the Republican voters, and then we went a couple questions deeper, and these folks owned guns and said, yeah, it makes sense to ban AR-15s. But my
Hmm.
takeaway from that was because it took so long into the conversation to get to the point where they were like, yeah, we should ban AR-15s. I realized that this was not the issue on which they're voting.
Right. Okay. So that was not their trigger. So you've seen this new CBS poll, and the one number I can't take my eyes off of is the 44% of Republicans who said that mass shootings should be accepted as part of a free society. And I read that over
That's
several times.
scary.
Okay, it's scary. And I thought, okay, there must be some misunderstanding here. Okay, right. So 44% of Republicans said mass shootings are inevitable, quote, as part of a free society. Now, 85% of Democrats, 73% of independents say that no, mass shootings are preventable if we really tried. When you read that, I mean, I understand this conflation of, freedom, and the AR-15, but to basically say that we have to accept it as part of a free society. I mean, that Jonathan, help talk me down on this one.
I would just say that part of the reason that we have government is to arbitrate when freedoms come in conflict, and there may be
Yeah.
a freedom to own a gun, but there should also be, and the government should protect the freedom to go to school, the freedom to go to the grocery store, the freedom to express your opinion without being shot. So, I mean, this is the sort of conundrum of our politics is everybody's desire to have freedom for me but not thee.
Yeah.
And in order to have, I think almost everyone would agree with this concept to the extent that they think about it. Like, in order to have freedoms, you need to have them protected. Somebody needs to protect them, and a government has the ability to do that. And the government has to balance the various interests of freedom. And right now, we are clearly out of balance when it comes to uh, the ease with which someone can just pull off one of these, horrific mass shootings.
What I think is really extraordinary is you realize this sort of inversion of the political universe because conservatives and Republicans would never have said that acts of terrorism are the and the inevitable part of a free society. Um, Conservatives and Republicans would never say that about street violence, urban violence, the number of people that are being killed. That's the kind of thing that you would have expected. Maybe from a seminar of folks in Berkeley saying, well, yes, we shouldn't crack down on Islamic terrorism because that's the price that we have to pay for being in a free society. Or yes, there's lots of carnage in the streets, but that is the price that we have to pay. Conservatives and Republicans have rejected that kind of logic for decades, and suddenly they're going, no, this kind of mass murder when a teenager with an AR-15 guns down 19 children, well, that's just inevitable. That's the price we have to pay. I mean, there's something deeply broken there.
Yeah, I mean, we are obviously struggling with this as a society at large, and well, most of us, right? 44% of Republicans, say that it's an inevitable part of a free society. I find that alarming, and maybe you're right that there was some confusion in the poll.
I don't
I
know that. No, I don't know that there's confusion in the. I think there's confusion in people's minds.
Yeah,
I just think that the fetishization of guns, is hand in hand with this. That this is the symbol of my manhood and my freedom. I found a New York Times article from I think it was like 40 years ago. About the AR-15. For those who love the rifle, it is seen as a testament to freedom, a rite of passage shared between parents and children. Really,
right.
a token to welcome soldiers home, a tradition shared with friends at the range. And yet, you think about in the last 4 years, we could spend the rest of the podcast me reading to you the mass murders committed with that gun, and yet nothing's changed.
Yeah, I mean the semi-automatic rifles that for the layperson pretty much seem like automatic rifles. I've fired an AR-15 at a gun range before. There's not much purpose to it, um, other than killing a large number of people indiscriminately in a small space. I mean, on a military level, suppression fire, but like this isn't what you would defend your home with because you would accidentally shoot family members. And you would
Yeah,
only need it if you were being, assaulted by like a SEAL team or something, like where you're going
yeah.
to lose anyway.
So, but yeah,
That idea, is kind of out the window if you've ever used one. it's
I
it's
can't claim that I have. No.
but I think that regardless of what the legislative piece of this is, there's got to be some discussion in our society about, like, again, where one person's freedom bumps into another person's freedom, and the balance again is like obviously off kilter.
So, at the end of the day, do they get anything done? Will there be a bill passed by Congress?
I think it's highly unlikely, and again, to the
I
extent
agree.
that they do something, it will not be something that addresses the problem
So, see,
or any of the
right,
problems. And look, I mean, my kids do active shooter drills at school.
mhm. Oh god, just
Like, I didn't grow up with that, and then
no,
then you
neither
have
did
to
I.
explain to them that actually what they're doing is an active shooter drill because they don't call them that. I think my son said that they did earthquake drills. I'm
Okay.
like, we don't have earthquakes where we live.
All right. In some ways, I think at least that's preferable. It feels like it puts a veil over the absolute insanity of all of this. It is interesting though watching because I do think there are good faith efforts to come up with some sort of a compromise. Things like fixing the background checks. These are no brainers. I mean, the percentage of Americans that support this, and for example, even in Texas, John Cornyn has a little bit of breathing room. He's not up for reelection for a long time. You do have a group of Republican donors and gun rights activists who've taken out full page ads saying, "Okay, we're okay with some sort of gun responsibility reform." So you look at the data points, and there's reason to think that things are moving, except for what you mentioned before. It is this passion gap. And that is going to be unmoved because the closer they get to it, the louder and more intense the opposition is going to get. And there's absolutely no reason that I can think of that Republicans would resist it now when they have failed to resist it, you know, time and time and time again. So that's why I'm cynical.
I mean, I would just say, we hear all these tropes, Charlie, like the idea that, whatever gun law gets proposed, they say, well, that wouldn't have stopped this
Yeah.
shooting or that shooting, or it doesn't act as a deterrent to a crazy person. And I'm like, we watched the Capitol get rushed on January 6th. And to my knowledge, none of the people who rushed into the Capitol were armed with semi automatic weapons.
Can
I
you
haven't
imagine
seen
that?
anybody charged with that. And to me, what that says is they understood that if they rushed the Capitol with semi automatic weapons, that they would A, likely be shot, and B, charged with much more serious crimes, like terrorism crimes.
Yeah, well,
So I think our laws do act as deterrents, even if the law doesn't specifically address a given situation. You can have laws that say, we frown upon uh, the easy purchase of AR-15s or other semi-automatic weapons, um, or laws that say we accept the easy purchase of semi-automatic weapons.
so I want to talk about your big scoop this week that's generated a huge amount of buzz that Trump is considering launching his 2024 presidential bid this summer. So let's talk about that and why he might be considering doing that and the internal debate in Trump world about why that might not be a good idea. But let's do that right after this. I hope you all had a great Memorial Day weekend. I know that I did. We had family and friends out to the lake cottage. And of course, because this is Wisconsin, we fire up the grill. And because I had a package from Omaha Steaks, we were able to have a great time. I have to tell you how much everybody enjoyed the entire selection. So here's a little bit of gift giving wisdom from Omaha Steaks. Dads want steaks. And with Father's Day just around the corner, there's not a better gift than Omaha Steaks, trust me. Visit omahasteaks.com, type Bulwark in the search bar, and order the Dads Want Steaks package. For just $99, this limited time package includes 16 mouth-watering entrees that he's guaranteed to love, like smoky, tender bacon-wrapped filet mignon, gourmet jumbo franks, and their air-chilled boneless chicken breasts. And for a sweet finish, delicious caramel apple tartlets. Look, I'm getting hungry just thinking about them, and I have to say that these were a big hit over the last weekend, and you cannot beat the price. And as a special gift for my listeners, when you type Bulwark in the search bar and order the Dads Want Steaks package, you'll also get eight free Omaha Steaks burgers. These burgers are full of bold, beefy flavor made from 100% Omaha steaks, and now they're bigger than ever at a whopping 6 ounces. Look, don't wait. Send Dad more than just one gift. Send him an experience he's just going to love and he can share with you. So go to omahasteaks.com and type Bulwark into the search bar. Order the Dads Want Steaks package. You'll get 16 entrees, 4 desserts, plus 8 free Omaha Steaks burgers. Omaha Steaks isn't just steak. It's the best steak of your life, guaranteed. That's omahasteaks.com, keyword Bulwark. Okay, we are back with Jonathan Allen, the senior national political reporter for NBC News, and his books include Lucky, How Joe Biden Barely Won the Presidency. Okay, so Jonathan, you reported this week that Trump is bored down at Mar-a-Lago and itching to get back into the political arena, and that he's not satisfied with just being a kingmaker. He wants to be the king again. He wants to be a candidate. So tell me about it.
Yeah, I mean, there's this picture that advisors paint of him of, he's antsy. He doesn't like, just endorsing people he barely knows and then watching them in some cases lose. May was tough for him in terms of the big high profile races where he, people call it the Trump revenge tour. where he failed to unseat Brian Kemp, the governor of Georgia, and Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State of Georgia, and lost a couple of other gubernatorial races in Nebraska and Idaho. And he wants to like get in. He likes being a candidate. He likes going to rallies. He likes the attention that's on him, and he's itching to get in. And his advisors are sort of split between this idea that he should wait till after the midterms, which is the traditional time when presidential candidates announce, or perhaps get in early as this summer. There are there are a bunch of reasons for him to not get in. The one that's cited most frequently is that if he starts a campaign, there are regulations that
Hmm.
in terms of how much money he can raise for the campaign committee and the court. There's a regulation that supposedly bans coordination between the campaign and his super PAC, although it's a very thin regulation that's not really enforced. And that's one of the reasons. The other reasons include not depriving Republican midterm candidates of attention, and
Hmm.
basically taking that attention away from them and making it about his agenda rather than what they're running on. Um, but there are some advisors that think he should get in right now to harness the activism that he still has left over from 2020, and I think more important, and I think this is probably playing on him as much as anything, to try to stamp out the other Republicans who are looking at running in 2024. And of course, the big one there is Ron DeSantis, who has the limitation on when he could announce a presidential run because he's on the ballot this year,
For governor, right?
which means he can't say he's running for president until he wins re-election in Florida, because he can't tell the voters there that he's focused on the next election while he's still running in this one. So Trump has a window where he could get in and sort of preempt DeSantis. And I think it's harder for DeSantis to get into a race if Trump's already in it.
Well, that's the thinking, and you mentioned that Jason Miller, who longtime advisor, talked to you and said that he has recommended that Trump get in this summer and make those intentions clear because it would deny fuel to the busload of GOP hopefuls in his rear view mirror. So, first of all, why would Jason Miller say that publicly? I'm
I
just I'm
think
just
he's
I'm just
trying.
curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, well, I know I was a little surprised too
Yeah,
that he was
yeah,
willing to say that on the record. I understood that was his feeling, so that's why I called him and asked him.
yeah.
And he was fine being on the record. And I suspect the reason is that he wants to plant a flag that allows others who feel the same to start contacting Trump and to tell him to do it now. I mean, I think that that's a big signal or smoke signal.
And you also talked to a second advisor who thinks that Trump should stick to the more traditional route of waiting until after the midterms, and he or she told you that the Trump will likely act sooner rather than later. And Trump's obviously on the phone and he's soliciting and getting views, and he's impatient, right? So you point out that his impatience and lack of impulse control are factors here, which is always a great qualification for being the commander in chief. I guess, one of the things, so do you think is the assumption that if he announces that he's in, that just completely clears the field for him, that freezes the field, that it just freezes DeSantis out, that he's got no choice but to, bow out?
I think it certainly makes it harder for any of these other candidates to raise money, to
Yeah.
campaign, to go to events in early primary states. DeSantis is already a little bit limited on some of those things, but DeSantis has raised, I think he has like $100 million in his reelection campaign. So I think Trump saying, straight out that he's running does make it harder for those folks to get in. It's interesting that second advisor, I thought this was an unusual burst of honesty too, of saying, my advice is wait till after the midterms, but I don't think he's actually going to do that because he's so impatient. And what they said was, the question is really more, does he just hit send on the press release, or is he able to wait long enough to put together a formal event at least?
See, well, what's interesting to me though is that the big question mark is whether that would have any impact on the midterms because clearly there are a lot of folks that would love to see Donald Trump basically being on the ballot. I mean, he is anyway. I mean, in effect, with all of the endorsements, but it certainly clarifies things, doesn't it? I mean, from the Demo, I mean, how would Democrats feel about this? Does it sort of clarify that? that we are still in the Trump era? Because I hear from, I'm sure you do as well, a lot of Democrats that sort of live in this alternative, wish casting universe where they think, well, he's not really going to do it. Remember, these were the people who thought when he was elected that he wouldn't actually take office or that he wasn't interested in being president. Those people are still, I'm not sure, believing that Donald Trump is serious about becoming president again. So again, what, if any, impact does this have on the midterms?
I mean, no matter how much Democrats put their fingers in their ears and go, no, 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 no. Donald Trump is not only a reality, but he is
Yes.
the largest force defining our politics today. If he gets in, that will be more so the case.
Yes, exactly.
I think most Democratic midterm candidates would like to see him get in because, to your point, it clarifies. One of his advisors said to me that a reason to wait is that if he starts a rematch with Biden too early, that it gives Biden a contrast point, and it may help Biden get some better traction right now.
I think that's right, and also, but every Republican candidate now will be asked a series of questions, including, will you support Donald Trump for reelection? They won't be able to dodge that question. That's an obvious question. Every single one will have to answer. Also, now we have every single statement that Donald Trump makes becomes a potential pitfall. Reporters will ask every Republican candidate around the country, well, this is what the man that you've said that you would support for president has said. Do you agree with that? Right. I mean, so that creates that dynamic again. Not that it's not already there, but it would supercharge that before the midterm. So, I mean, how do Republicans outside of MAGA world feel about this? Do they think of this as a massive distraction? Have Republicans been sort of in denial, thinking that they can keep their head down and maybe he'll just go away?
I mean, it depends on the Republicans, right? If
Yeah.
you're a Trump MAGA voter, you are excited for him to be part of the discussion at all times. I think for a lot of the sort of professional Republican class, they see a potential disaster in just what you talked about, candidates being asked about Trump all the time. We've been living for the last several months in a primary season where Donald Trump has one effect. In a general election season where the control of the House and control of the Senate are going to turn on what happens in swing districts, which are by definition, more closely divided. The Trump questions become a catch-22 for candidates. They can either reassure the middle or reassure their base, but it's very difficult to do both of those things at once.
Yeah. So there have been murmurs of a July 4th announcement. So if this happens, it might happen very, very quickly. I mean, so July 4th is the date that you're hearing?
Well, I heard
Possible?
a couple of people told me that they had been asked to reserve July 4th as a possible launch date. They're not certain that it's going to happen. They were told informally to reserve it. One of them said to me, that in Trump world, an informal reservation means nothing.
Yeah.
Pointing to the mercurial nature of scheduling in that universe. But if he was going to do it July 4th, we would probably know, a week to 10 days out that that's what was going on. I mean, probably take about that long to put together a big event somewhere.
So let's go back to this whole point about, freezing the field, making it hard for other people. You point out that there are reasons for Trump to feel some urgency, that you are hearing the footsteps of some of the other Republican wannabes growing louder. Ron DeSantis, Mike Pompeo, Nikki Haley, Josh Hawley, Senator Cotton. Some have been visiting the early primary states and endorsing candidates themselves or delivering high profile speeches. So, and also, as you point out, there's this dynamic in which his favorites in some of the multi-candidate races, often fail, win or lose, to finish with as much as a third of the vote, and some see that as a sign his influence is waning. So, are these the kinds of things he's going? I mean, I'm sick of people thinking that, no, I'm not the God King anymore, and we have to shut down all of this other buzz for the other candidates. I mean, is that part of this dynamic?
Yeah, I don't think he likes reading chyrons that say that his influence is waning. I don't think he likes watching losses. I think people around him would tell you if they were on truth serum that a lot of the losses are places where Trump, endorsed out of a fit of pique or anger at a particular candidate and was essentially making an anti-endorsement. But we saw this. JD Vance wins in Ohio with about a third of the vote. Dr. Oz wins in Pennsylvania with about a third of the vote. Madison Cawthorn loses his renomination contest in North Carolina with about 31% of the vote bearing Trump's endorsement. what we've seen is in the most competitive races, especially when you see, three or more candidates, there's about a third of the electorate that's just hardcore MAGA going to do whatever Trump says. There's about a third that will go to a candidate that is, about Trumpism, but not
Sure.
necessarily, but not endorsed by Trump, and then about a third that is anti-Trump. And you see a candidate like Brian Kemp's a great example in Georgia, who got 70+% of the vote against former Senator David Perdue. And what he did as governor was push through a very Trumpian agenda in the legislature, even though Trump was going after him, which helped him secure that Trumpist, the base that likes Trumpism, but not necessarily is attached to who Trump endorses. And then by virtue of the fact that Trump was attacking him, he also became the candidate
Mm,
of the non-Trump voters or the
yes.
anti-Trump voters in the Republican Party. Between those two things, he got about 70%.
So you have a very interesting quote in your story from one of the second advisors who's more skeptical about an early announcement saying that Trump in modest doses has been good for Trump. That the fact that he is not like in our faces all the time, seems to have not hurt his poll numbers. In fact, people forget things, they rewrite history. So talk to me about that a little bit. That thinking that if he gets back in the race, then you turn up the dial and maybe remind people why they thought he was kind of disgraceful.
Yeah, it's a dynamic that I think carries over from both of the last two presidential elections, in which the candidate that was getting the most attention and most airtime was the one that was doing worst.
Right.
That is to say, if you watch Trump during those pandemic press briefings, and Biden was, off the trail for the most part, in his basement, where, that was the time at which Trump was doing the most damage to himself. The Hillary Clinton folks noticed during the 2016 campaign that when she was in the spotlight, she was doing worse, and when Trump was more in the spotlight, he was doing worse. So
This is very interesting.
it's something that's kind of taken hold in our politics in the Trump era that you don't necessarily benefit from being the subject of attention.
Okay, so let's go down the history nerd trail a bit. As, as you point out, there is a historical precedent for presidents who've been defeated for reelection, waiting a term and then running again. Obviously, Grover Cleveland made the comeback in 1892 when he beat Benjamin Harrison, who had defeated him back in 1888. Right. So, I mean, this has happened before. It's only happened once, right?
Yeah, I don't remember that election or that
I
set
do.
of elections in
I remember it well. Yeah, it was lit.
um, Yeah, but and not only that, but there were six times in American history where a president has run against the person he defeated 4 years earlier.
Mhm,
So,
mhm.
in the case of Cleveland and Harrison, Cleveland was president, lost to Harrison, then came back and beat Harrison. But there have been several other cases where there's been a rematch. Starting with Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, and most recently when Dwight Eisenhower beat Adlai Stevenson the second twice
Twice.
in 1952 and 1956. We haven't seen it a lot lately, but it's certainly something that has happened, repeatedly in American history that the public has seen a rematch. Right now you have to anticipate that the most likely thing that we would see is a rematch. I'm not predicting that that's necessarily what's going to happen, but just the most likely.
It is the most likely. You got me thinking though about sort of another almost like feels like a footnote in history that almost every person who has been president wants to become president again, even if they're out of office. So, for example, Teddy Roosevelt didn't run for reelection in 1908, but then ran in 1912 against his Republican successor. He wanted another term. Ulysses S. Grant apparently, constantly wanted another term. Herbert Hoover thought that Republicans might turn to him sometime, after his defeat. Harry Truman I think actually thought that somebody was gonna come to his door and give him then I mean, it's interesting. This is not unusual that folks get the bug. What, of course, is different about this is that Trump is not likely, to be rejected by his party, or at least not now. I mean, look, but it's a long time. I guess that's the other thing. Announcing in 2022 and then running a campaign for 2 years, I mean, that's a really, really long time. I mean, that's a marathon. And that's a marathon for the candidate, but also I know we've asked this before, Jonathan, but Is there just a Trump exhaustion factor that he's risking igniting by having the endless campaign?
They may tire of him, but they also may not have other choices that they like.
Well, that's right. Yeah.
And
Well,
we're watching Bernie Sanders, gear up to run again.
oh, come on. Seriously?
His campaign manager from 2020 said that in a memo to allies that if there was an open seat, if Biden didn't run, they should keep their powder dry and be ready for Bernie to. Which, saying that right now suggests that it's also possible that Bernie would run a primary against Biden.
Okay, so how old is Bernie?
That's a
I
good
don't.
question.
Okay,
78-ish.
yeah. I mean, I can't think the answer to that is old, really, really old. See, this
Yeah,
is
he's
the
like a
one.
year older than Biden.
There's got to be sort of that sense that, oh my God, our politics is going to be 80-year-olds running against each other forever. I mean, it's just like,
We went backward generationally, right? There was this period of baby boomer presidents, and then now we're doing the pre-baby boom.
oh my God, yeah. Okay, so one more question. So Maggie Haberman tweeted out your story and suggested that Trump's endorsement of Kevin McCarthy over the weekend makes an early presidential announcement more likely. And I guess the logic is that, MAGA world's not happy about the endorsement because they think that, McCarthy's a rhino and part of the establishment, and Trump's going to be feeling, pressure to shore up his base. So what do you think? Do you think there's any connection there?
I'm not sure that there is, but there are a couple of things that sort of speaks to. While it was an endorsement, I believe, of McCarthy for reelection rather
Yeah.
than an endorsement of him for
Ah,
speaker, there is a group of Trump supporters who want to see him elected Speaker of the House if Republicans take the majority. And so I think that, sort of signals where Trump is, that he doesn't want to be Speaker of the House.
okay.
That's one way I look at
That's
that.
interesting.
And then the second way is, shoring up support from somebody who is, influential within Republican circles. I mean, Kevin McCarthy is not the most influential person in the Republican Party, but he certainly has a significant number of allies in Congress and around the country in terms of donors and stuff. And so Trump giving that sign of goodwill to McCarthy, who is again, he was booed. McCarthy came on videotape
Yes.
at Trump's Wyoming rally to endorse Liz Cheney's opponent, and there was a smattering of boos in the audience. He's not loved by the Trump base. So for Trump to go out there and extend himself a little bit for McCarthy, I think is the kind of thing that you would expect to see repaid.
Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit and talk about some of the awkwardness among Democrats. That's a target-rich environment, by the way. But more specifically, John Fetterman's health has Democrats worried. Let's talk about that right after this. If you're like me, your whole life is on the internet. Well, that may be a slight exaggeration, but think about everything that you do, the things that you read, the things that you look at, your private communications, your banking. Using the internet without ExpressVPN is like taking a call on a train or a bus on speaker for everybody to listen in. You don't know who has access to your most private, sensitive information, so don't be that person. Here's why I use ExpressVPN. Internet service providers know every single website you visit, and they're tracking you. Don't take my word for it. And in the United States, they can legally sell this information to ad companies and tech giants who then use your data to target you. ExpressVPN creates a secure, encrypted tunnel between your device and the internet so that people can't peep on your online activity. All you have to do is just fire up the app and click one button. It works on phones, laptops, even routers, so that everybody who shares your Wi-Fi can be protected. No wonder it's rated #1 by Business Insider and The Verge. And again, I use ExpressVPN every time I go online, and it is a must-have for anybody who uses the internet, which means pretty much all of you. So secure your online activity today at expressvpn.com/bulwark and get an extra 3 months of ExpressVPN free, as in free. That's expressvpn.com/bulwark, expressvpn.com/bulwark. Okay, we are back with Jonathan Allen. All right, so let's talk about John Fetterman, who is Pennsylvania's lieutenant governor, the Democratic nominee for U.S. Senate. He issued a statement last Friday saying that he almost died after suffering a stroke last month, and that his condition was far worse than his campaign had indicated. He suffered a stroke on May 13th, had a pacemaker implanted. In a statement, he said he should have been taking the medication his doctor prescribed to him way back in 2017. His doctor issues a statement saying that Fetterman has cardiomyopathy, a disease that makes it harder for the heart to deliver blood to the body, but he will be fine. So, Jonathan, tell me what are you hearing about all of this? You wrote a story actually before that all happened about how Democrats are worried about Fetterman's health, but also the fact that he hasn't really been all that transparent about his problems. So, what's going on with Fetterman in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the story was basically that there was no timetable for his return to the campaign trail, and that Democrats were, as one of them put it, very nervous about both his health and the lack of transparency. And his team pushed back on that, but then um, then the next day basically came out with the transparency that I think a lot of those Democrats were looking for. I'm not sure uh, that made them feel any more comfortable, because what came out was that they had been at least obfuscated about his actual health, and his actual health is not great. Not just a pacemaker, but a pacemaker with a defibrillator. So there's the pacemaker regulates the heartbeat, and then the defibrillator kind of shocks the heart if it is moving toward failure. That doesn't sound good. And I think where things stand right now is the Democrats don't have much choice but to get behind Fetterman.
Yeah.
His campaign is doing a lot of sort of attempts to show that that they're active. There have been a bunch of endorsement announcements in the last week. He just launched his first ads of the general election campaign. So the campaign is going on without him for the moment.
So, yeah, I mean, you had reported that some officials were studying the state ballot replacement laws, the deadlines in August. That's unlikely now. They're going to back away from that. Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
I
yeah.
think they always, even the people who were doing
Okay.
that, thought it was a less likely scenario. My understanding is basically that what would happen is the state party committee would choose another candidate. The deadline is 85 days before the general election. I can't tell you which day in August that ends up being, but it's the first or second week of August, I think. But it seems very unlikely that that's going to come into play. I mean, he did win the Democratic primary very convincingly. I think he won all 67 counties in Pennsylvania. And the other question for Democrats would be, who would be a better candidate than Fetterman? He's the kind of candidate I think that they would dream up in a lab in terms of his ability to communicate with working class voters, across the state. And at the same time, they are concerned about, in a lot of ways, it's the establishment of the Democratic Party concerned about the fact that it doesn't really have close ties to him.
Yeah, they were not wild about it. But as you point out, Fetterman's not your average candidate. I mean, he has this direct, authentic way of talking to voters who feel left out. People who are not college educated. He is the candidate that knows how to talk to the kinds of voters the Democrats have lost. And as you point out, he goes to the red district. Voters feel like he's speaking to them, and so he's been held up as a model of the way the Democrats can reconnect with the white working class. And the reason why this is such a huge story is obviously Pennsylvania is viewed by Democrats as, well, maybe their best possible pickup opportunity in the midterms. So I guess the question is, do questions about health, do they make a difference to the general election voter? And I guess one thing I'm thinking about is that John Fetterman, he looks indestructible. I wonder if that's a factor. You know what I'm getting at here? If he
Yeah.
was frail and old, people would go, I don't know. I don't know if he can handle it. But this guy comes out, and he looks like a wildebeest.
Look at the United States Senate, and it does not look
Right.
like a model of health. So, you know, everything's comparative, but he seems to be in better shape than a lot of the Senate. Certainly, a lot younger than most of the Senate. And to your point about talking to voters, I mean, he put out the first ad, and it it feels a little bit like a Trump ad without
Huh.
some of the without some of the, like, ominous tone, but it's very much like, I'm for Pennsylvania, I'm for America, I'm not for shipping our jobs overseas, I'll end that. And it's very anti-Washington. It's as if the president of the United States and Congress are not run, are not Democrats at this point. He's running against Washington, and in particular, the drugs, the Washington approved the drugs that killed our children and things like that. So I mean, it has a very MAGA feel to it.
No, I watched that ad and I thought, "This is interesting. This is a politically interesting ad," and he's clearly going after voters that, some Democrats have written off. I don't have a feel for Pennsylvania politics or know how I mean, I guess I don't have a feel about how Dr. Oz plays in Pennsylvania politics. I guess I'm struck by the fact that I mean, I think of him as this television huckster, fraudster, et cetera, and he wins the primary over David McCormick with Trump's endorsement, but he just barely won it. And there was a lot of skepticism among Republicans who I assume will rally around him in the end. But, I just give me a sense. I mean, Fetterman, I can see being a good fit for Pennsylvania. Dr. Oz, not so much. So just give me your state of play. How does Dr. Oz, who voted in the Turkish elections a few years ago, play in a state like Pennsylvania?
I mean, and that's exactly what Fetterman's going after, right? One of he had the two ads, and the tagline, the slogan that he's just rolling out is "From Pennsylvania for Pennsylvania." Certainly the first part is
Mm,
a contrast with Oz, and I think
interesting.
Fetterman would argue that the second part is also a contrast with Oz. And I think you'll see even harsher attempts to promote that contrast from outside groups. They're going to say Oz is not from here, and they will let the voter determine whether that means not from Pennsylvania or not from the United States. But like, I guess I would say it's a more Republican way of advertising. It's kind of a harder edge than I think most
Interesting.
Democrats usually run on.
Right. So yeah, I was looking at your Twitter feed over the last couple of days, and you tweeted one of your colleagues from NBC had a story about how Republicans are bracing for the next round of Trump's primary chaos, his demands for loyalty over electability. And Republicans in Nevada, in Missouri, and my home state of Wisconsin aired their frustrations to NBC. And I have to say, that I know a lot of people here in Wisconsin kind of scratching their heads about, what Trump is doing, jumping into a very competitive governor's race, endorsing a candidate who is by no means a front runner, who does not have a lot of grassroots support, and really every time he jumps into these races, he seems to be dividing the party. And I guess this is an interesting aspect of all of this that Donald Trump could sit back and win everywhere because everyone is MAGA to some degree or other. But he has decided instead to insert himself personally, which forces many Republicans who may be sympathetic to him to go, yeah, we're not going along with you on this race for governor or for Senate. So give me your sense of what the mood is in these states.
Yeah, I mean, so this is a story by my colleague Natasha Korecki, who saw it happening and and started making calls, and sure enough, got people in some of these states saying, "Look, we prefer the former president, to stay out
Yep.
of a lot of these races." And what it to your point, I mean, it really lays bare the limits of Trump's influence. Again, when he's winning, sometimes it's when his candidate is winning, sometimes it's with a very small percentage of the vote. At the same time, what he does with all the victories is he creates this cadre of loyalists. I mean,
Super
if
loyalist.
you are, Tim Michaels and you're running in Wisconsin against, and I guess there's several candidates there, but the main one, Rebecca Kleefisch, like,
Right.
if you win that race on Trump's endorsement, you know what got you into office,
Right. You are totally beholden. Yeah. On the other hand, if he loses, then other candidates who might have been much more sympathetic will feel a certain independence from him.
right? I mean, it's risky. It's probably the best way to put it.
So one of the strange little twists here in Wisconsin, and Tim Michaels is a business executive who ran for Senate unsuccessfully, ran a quite an underwhelming campaign, and really has been off the radar screen politically in Wisconsin for years. Jumps into a race that was already somewhat competitive, including the fact that the former Lieutenant Governor Rebecca Kleefisch, who is clearly the front runner and probably still is, has the very strong support of the Republican quote unquote establishment, including Scott Walker. So Scott Walker is very strongly for Clayfish. Trump jumps in on Michael's side, which kind of sets up a little bit of tension there. And all the indications that I have seen, both behind the scenes and publicly reported, is that one of the brokers of this deal is Reince Priebus. That Reince Priebus apparently still is advising Trump, and that Reince Priebus, who used to be the chairman here, decided that he was going to go along with Michael. So, I mean, there's like factions within factions. And it is kind of an interesting, it feels kind of Byzantine, if you know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
trying to just sort out, which elements of the Republican Party and Trump world are in various. I mean, that was true in Pennsylvania, right? I mean, you had David McCormick, who was the more mainstream candidate, but he had Stephen Miller, the anti-immigration
Yeah.
homunculus, who was on his side. So it's become very splintered, hasn't it?
Absolutely. And I mean, the criminology of Trump world is endlessly fascinating if you decide to dive into it. But I think the key thing to remember is that no one's ever really cast out. And that's not terribly unusual. I mean, the Clinton world operates like that, where, someone is in disfavor, or they lose a job or whatever, and then a year later or 3 years later, you see that they're, on a plane with Hillary Clinton or Bill Clinton advising them. I think this is what's going on with Priebus, right? He's somebody who has some access to Trump still, and Trump, I think, smartly solicits a wide range of views from current and former advisors on all the things that he does. He doesn't always take the best advice or choose best, but I think it's smart to cast a wide net.
Yeah, but it's also always risky to dive into a state when you don't know really what's going on. And I have to tell you, I don't think this is I don't think I'm telling tales out of school. A prominent Republican, former United States senator, went on to become the president of the Heritage Foundation, without naming any names. I remember called me back, and I can't remember whether, I think it was 2010, and he said, we're thinking of making an endorsement in the governor's race, and basically we want to make sure that we support somebody who has strong grassroots support from the base and strong support from talk radio. And we're thinking about getting involved in the governor's race. And what do you think about, former Congressman Mark Newman, who's running for governor? And I said, well, I have to tell you that Mark Newman does not have support from the grassroots, does not have support from talk radio, and will lose very badly in a primary to Scott Walker. And this individual, who I'm not naming, said, okay, well, that's very, very helpful. Thank you for your advice. And then the next day endorsed Mark Newman, who then who then went on to lose very badly in the primary to Scott Walker. And I was like, okay, why did you make the call? What did you think? You asked very specific questions. And that I had that flashback to the whole Michaels thing, because Michael strikes me as that kind of a candidate, somebody who's been gone for 10 years, who has a $17 million house, I think in Connecticut or New York, and suddenly dives back in with no grassroots support, as far as I can tell. I don't know what the talk radio world is doing. It's not quite as influential as it might have been. And yet, they're going in, and I think it's probably going to turn out the same way. But who knows? What do I know, right, Jonathan? Okay, speaking of what do you know, you were in Wyoming. On a scale of 1 to 100. See, I'm putting you on the spot now. I know you love this. What would you put Liz Cheney's chances of surviving a Republican primary at this point?
I mean, I don't want to get into specific numbers there, but I mean, if she won, it would be an upset. So less than 50%.
Okay, huge upset.
I think it'd be a pretty big upset if she won.
I think so. I'm going with huge, but I'm willing to accept pretty big. Jonathan Allen, thank you so much for spending so much time with us on the podcast. I always appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie.
The Bulwark podcast is produced by Katie Cooper with audio production by Jonathan Siri. I'm Charlie Sykes. Thank you for listening to today's Bulwark podcast, and we'll be back tomorrow. We'll do this all over again.
There are about 1 million podcasts about money, but Bad with Money with Gabby Dunn is the one where finances meet social justice.
Investing in dating with Bella Gandhi.
Do you believe that people should pay for dating apps?
To me, invest in the dating process. There's nothing more important than finding the person you want to spend the rest of your life with. There's a stigma. Everything should be free. You're going to go to Whole Foods, meet eyes over mangoes, and all the dominoes fall in perfect order. That's just a load of garbage.
Bad with Money. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.